You're losing arguments, not because you're wrong, but because you're too reactive. You explain too much, you try too hard. And the worst part? The people who win, who command respect effortlessly, aren't necessarily smarter or more qualified. They just know how to control the game. Here's the truth. The loudest person in the room isn't the most powerful. The calmest is. That's where Stoicism comes in. Imagine walking into any conversation, whether it's a heated debate, a negotiation, or even a confrontation, and remaining completely unshaken. No over-explaining, no defensive scrambling, just unshakable, calculated control. Sounds impossible? It's not. But it requires mastering a way of speaking that most people overlook. In this video, I'm going to show you how to combine Stoic principles with razor-sharp communication skills to become untouchable in conversations. This isn't just about being calm, it's about using strategic silence, precise wording, and controlled emotions to shift any interaction in your favor. And here's the part that most people won't tell you. True power in communication doesn't come from saying more. It comes from saying less, but with absolute intent. You'll learn the techniques that great leaders. Negoti number 1. The stone-faced persuasion method. You ever notice how the loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control? We've all been in those situations. Someone's ranting, raising their voice, dominating the conversation, trying to force their emotions onto you. And what do most people do? They match the energy, they argue back, they get defensive. But what if I told you the real power move is doing nothing? Well, not exactly nothing. It's something far more calculated, far more effective. It's called the stone-faced persuasion method. Now you might be thinking, wait, so I just sit there like a statue while someone's going off on me? That sounds weak. Trust me, it's anything but. When you strip away emotional reactions, you force the other person to deal with their own words. Most people expect a reaction. They need a reaction. It's how they validate their own emotional outbursts. But when you don't give it to them, it's like pulling the rug out from under their feet. They start second-guessing themselves. They lose momentum, and suddenly, you have control over the conversation. You know the type of people who thrive on getting a rise out of others. That one coworker who loves to poke at you in meetings, or that one relative who just lives for an argument at family gatherings. We've all been there. They throw out bait, waiting for you to react. But here's the trick. When you maintain an expression of calm, neutral indifference, it does something to them. It unsettles them. It forces them to process what they just said without the emotional pushback they expected. And that's when they start fumbling. I once used this on a guy at work who loved to dominate conversations. You know the kind, talks over people, dismisses opinions, thrives on making others look small. One day, in a team meeting, he tried it on me. He interrupted, threw in a sarcastic remark, and waited. I could feel the eyes in the room shifting toward me, waiting for my comeback. But instead, I just looked at him. No reaction, no smirk, no raised eyebrow, just silence and a steady gaze. And do you know what happened? He laughed, nervously, tried to double down. But now, everyone in the room felt the awkwardness of his own words. And without me doing anything, he ended up explaining himself, softening his tone, and ultimately backing off. It was almost too easy. This is about reclaiming your space, your peace, and your dignity in conversations. It's about breaking the cycle of reacting just because someone expects you to. The next time someone tries to push your buttons, resist the urge to engage emotionally. Hold your ground. Let the silence work for you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is absolutely nothing. Number 2. Verbal judo, the power of agreeing to disarm. You ever notice how arguments feel like a game of ping pong? Someone serves up an insult, and you smack it right back. They raise their voice, you match it. Before you know it, you're both red in the face, saying things you don't mean, and no one actually wins. But what if I told you that the most powerful way to shut down an argument is to agree? Yeah, I know, sounds ridiculous, feels like surrender. But hear me out. This isn't about backing down. It's about winning without even picking up the racket. We've all dealt with those people who thrive on confrontation. The co-worker who always finds a flaw in your idea, the friend who loves to one-up you, the stranger who seems personally offended by your existence. And they all have one thing in common. They're expecting resistance. They want pushback. They need you to fight back so they can keep going. But when you do the exact opposite, when you lean in, nod and say, "You're absolutely right," in a way that flips the script, it's like pulling the oxygen out of a fire. It can't burn anymore. I remember using this on a guy at work who loved correcting people. One day in a meeting, he interrupted me mid-sentence, loud, smug, full of himself. That won't work because X, Y, and Z. Now, old me would have gone straight into defense mode, proving him wrong, escalating the back and forth. But instead, I smiled and said, "You know what? You're right. That's a great point." And just like that, he froze. You could see the gears turning. He wasn't expecting that. He wanted me to argue, to get riled up, to make it a battle. Instead, I handed him the win. And in doing so, I took control of the conversation. The best part, once I agreed, he had nowhere to go. The tension broke. And guess what? 2 minutes later, he was agreeing with me. This isn't about being a pushover. It's about strategic redirection. When someone's trying to attack, agreeing on your terms puts them in an awkward spot. It diffuses their aggression, forces them to rethink their approach, and more often than not, makes them look for common ground instead. It's a psychological switch that shifts the power dynamic completely. So the next time someone comes at you, ready for a fight, try this. Pause, take a breath, and say, "You know what? You're absolutely right." Watch their face. Watch how quickly the energy shifts. Because sometimes the best way to win is to stop playing their game. Number 3. The 3-second Stoic pause. You ever say something in the heat of the moment and instantly regret it? That text you shouldn't have sent. That comeback that felt good for half a second but made things worse. Yeah, we've all been there. Emotions hijack the brain, and before you know it, words fly out of your mouth that you can't take back. But what if I told you there's a ridiculously simple trick that can stop this from happening? 3 seconds. That's all it takes. 3 silent seconds. Now, you might be thinking, 3 seconds? That's nothing. But trust me, 3 seconds can change everything. See, most people treat conversations like a tennis match. Someone hits the ball, and you hit it right back. Fast, reactive, emotional. But when you pause, even for just 3 seconds, you disrupt that rhythm. You take control. And most importantly, you give yourself time to decide whether what you want to say is the same as what you should say. We've all been in those moments where someone says something that gets under our skin. Maybe it's your boss unfairly calling you out. Maybe it's your partner throwing a passive-aggressive jab. Maybe it's that one friend who always knows exactly how to push your buttons. The instinct is to fire back, defend yourself, prove a point. But here's the thing. Reactivity is predictable. And when people know how you'll react, they control the conversation. The moment you introduce a pause, even just 3 seconds of silence, you make them uncomfortable. They start second-guessing. And in that space, you get to choose your response instead of just handing them your emotions on a silver platter. I once used this during a tense meeting at work. A co-worker, clearly trying to show off, interrupted me mid-sentence with a smug correction. The room went quiet. Eyes turned to me. Now the old me would have snapped back. defended my point, maybe even thrown in a little sarcasm, but instead, I just paused. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. And in that silence, something incredible happened. He got nervous. He started explaining himself, backpedaling, filling the awkward gap I created. And by the time I finally spoke, the entire energy of the room had shifted in my favor. I didn't have to fight for control. I had already taken it. This is about reclaiming your power in conversations. It's about stopping that emotional autopilot from making decisions for you. The next time you feel the urge to react instantly, stop, breathe, count to 3 in your head. Watch how it changes the dynamic. Because sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all until you decide it's time. Number 4, speak in paradoxes to confuse and conquer. Ever been in an argument where no matter what you say, the other person refuses to budge? It's like they're armed with a mental shield, deflecting every logical point you throw at them. Frustrating, right? But what if I told you there's a way to crack that shield, not by arguing harder, but by confusing them just enough to make them question themselves? The trick? Speak in paradoxes. Drop a statement so unexpected, so contradictory, that their brain short-circuits for just a moment. And in that pause, you gain control. Now you might be thinking, wait, what? Confusing someone on purpose? Isn't that manipulative? Not at all. This isn't about deception, it's about disruption. People are programmed to expect a certain rhythm in conversations. They anticipate resistance. They brace for the back and forth. But when you throw a paradox into the mix, you break that rhythm. It forces them to stop, process, and, if you do it right, question their own stance. I once tried this on a particularly stubborn coworker. You know the type, always had to be right, never willing to admit when they were wrong. One day, we were debating an approach to a project. He was dead set on his way being the only way. Instead of arguing, I simply said, "You know, sometimes the best way forward is actually sideways." He blinked, stared at me. You could almost see his brain buffering. "What do you mean?" he finally asked. And just like that, I had him. He went from stubbornly defending his position to genuinely thinking about what I was saying. That's the power of a paradox. It forces engagement. It turns a fight into a conversation. The beauty of this method is that it works in so many situations. Someone criticizes you unfairly. Instead of getting defensive, say, "You're right. Being wrong has really taught me a lot." Someone insists there's only one way to do something. Reply with, "Funny thing is, sometimes the longest route is actually the shortest." These kinds of statements do two things. They stop aggression in its tracks, and they shift the power back to you. This isn't about trickery, it's about showing that the world isn't as black and white as people think. It's about breaking people out of their rigid perspectives without having to fight them for it. Next time you find yourself up against someone who just won't listen, don't argue, don't resist. Just drop a paradox, let them wrestle with it, and watch as they start to see things your way. Because sometimes the best way to win is to make them rethink the game entirely. Number 5, the controlled indifference technique. There's a secret weapon that the most unshakable people in the world use. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it's not even about having the perfect argument. It's controlled indifference, the art of not reacting when the other person expects or wants you to. Master this, and you become untouchable. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, so I'm just supposed to not care? No, that's not it. This isn't about apathy. It's about calculated restraint. It's about choosing where your energy goes. Most people are reactive by nature. Someone insults them, they defend themselves. Someone raises their voice, they match the intensity. But when you respond exactly as expected, you're predictable, And when you're predictable, you're controllable. The controlled indifference technique flips this on its head. Think about a time when someone tried to provoke you. Maybe a co-worker made a snide remark in a meeting, or a friend threw a passive-aggressive comment your way. What do they want from you? A reaction. They want you flustered, angry, thrown off balance. But what if instead you shrugged? What if you nodded as if their words had zero impact on your state of mind? That's power. That's controlled indifference. I once had a manager who loved to push people's buttons. He'd throw out criticisms that felt designed to get under your skin. One day he looked at my work and said, "This is fine. I mean, I expected better, but sure, I guess this works." Now, the old me would have scrambled to defend myself, to prove my competence, but instead, I just smiled and said, "All right," and moved on. No justification, no visible frustration, just an effortless dismissal of his attempt to rattle me. And guess what? He never pulled that move on me again. Because people stop playing games when they realize you won't pick up the controller. The key here isn't to suppress your emotions, it's to own them. Controlled indifference doesn't mean you don't feel things. It means you refuse to give people the satisfaction of watching you lose control. It's about showing them, subtly but unmistakably, that their words don't have the power they thought they did. And that's pure psychological dominance. So next time someone tries to provoke you, don't fight back. Don't explain yourself. Don't scramble for approval. Just give a slight nod, a neutral or, if you really want to leave them wondering, an amused smirk. Because nothing is more disarming than realizing the person you're trying to shake simply does not care. Thank you for watching. I truly hope this video gave you some valuable insights into how Stoicism can transform the way you communicate, helping you stay calm, in control, and effortlessly persuasive. If you found this helpful, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps spread this message to more people who need it. And if you want more content on Stoicism, communication, and personal power, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Know someone who struggles with over-explaining or getting overwhelmed in conversations? Share this video with them. It might just be the shift they need, and I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever tried applying Stoic principles in a conversation? What worked? What didn't? Let's start a discussion and learn from each other. Remember, true power in communication isn't about talking more. It's about talking better. Stay strong, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.